You got to do the whole display setting again, Kristy, because it's gone a bit funny again. Same as what you did yesterday, weirdly enough. There you go, sorted.
Hi everyone. You've heard my dulcet tones all night, but we thought we'd come on just for maybe a quick 15 minutes or so, just to give you a little bit of a few golden nuggets and to bust some industry myths, because there's a lot going around in this space, as a lot of people have said recently. So we won't introduce ourselves. I think a lot of people know who we are, and we did the intro at the beginning. Simon and I are here. Isabel's our other business partner, but she's 26 and she does like to go out on a Friday night, so that's why she's not here. But yeah, so we thought we'd start off with some of the things that can go wrong in this industry and some of the myths that are out there that kind of need a bit of clarification. So I'm actually going to pass this slide over to Simon and shut up for a change.
Sure, no problems. Most people talk about how brilliant this space is, and is amazing, but they never talk about what can go wrong. So we like to tell people what can go wrong, and we mitigate all of this. And you can mitigate all of these issues, by the way, by working with the right providers and putting processes in place like any business. But it's important to understand that this is just a tiny list of things, but it's important stuff. Provider changing property spec mid-contract. So what's a good example of this actually is Serco. Serco, everybody knows Serco. Written in Serco's contracts is clause 15.4. What clause 15.4 states is that if you give Serco a family home, they can change that at their own expense to a HMO without ever telling you. That's what that clause states. So if you purchase that property as an inexperienced landlord and you get a mortgage on a family home and mortgage only, and Serco changed that to HMO without telling you, you are technically committing mortgage fraud. Quite a lot of lenders are wise to that now with Serco, so they'll only let you get a HMO mortgage with any property type for Serco, including a one-bed flat or a two-bed house, because they never check to see if it's possible to turn to an HMO, just assume they are going to do it. So it's important to understand all of the things that a provider is allowed to do within the spec of the lease, and understand your risk profile, and understand how it can affect you further down the line. So it's really important to understand that kinds of stuff. Lease structures and break clauses. This is my favorite thing of all time. And I love debunking people's Facebook posts on these ones. It's like a hobby of mine. So if we're all on social media, we would have all seen people advertising like mad, 10-year guaranteed rent, full FRI social housing contracts, guaranteed rent, come speak to me now. It's a favorite piece of marketing that you will never, ever see Auxilium Property Management do, because it's absolutely untrue. So a few myths here. Lease length. Let's use Serco again, because everybody loves Serco. Their current lease is 6 years and 9 months with a 3-year extension. So it's a 10-year lease, okay? But it's not a 10-year lease. It's a 6-year and 9-month lease. And those 10-year leases, by the way, people talk about, it's almost always Serco they're talking about. So it's a 6-year, 9 months lease. You cannot get lending on a 6-year, 9 months lease. You can get lending on a 5-year lease. So technically you're signing a 5-year lease. So that 10 years of guaranteed rent, by the way, is now a 5-year lease. So it's half the length I told you about. More importantly, actually, the lease length is irrelevant. What you need to understand is the break clauses. So all social housing contracts have to have break clauses. Technically they don't, but when you're dealing with asylum and general needs, stuff that certain fee do.
We call it kind of bread and butter, like
bread and butter social housing, yeah.
Probably up to the 5-year mark.
Not special supported housing, not long-term high needs tenants, just drug abuse, yeah. Ex-prisoners, all sorts of stuff, domestic violence, everything, stuff like that. So why are there break clauses in the contracts if they're guaranteed rent? You need a break clause in your contract for the lenders to be happy with it. So lenders want a break clause, and it's usually 6 months notice to the provider if you want to get your house back. So if you as a landlord go broke and the lender has to repossess your property, they want an out on that contract. They want to be able to get out of that contract. So if you say, worst comes to worst, you buy a property, it's got a 5-year lease on it. You go, you flicked the page though, Kristy. You know, lose my where I'm talking about. If you go broke, for instance, something happens in life, you never know. That provider doesn't want to stuck into a contract for 4.5 years on a property they've got to repossess and try and sell. They want out, they want vacant possession. So classic example of that is the current Mears lease. Mears, the asylum provider for the Northeast. They changed their contract fairly recently, deleted the landlord break clause. We cannot find a lender currently that will lend on that lease. Doesn't mean there isn't one. We haven't been able to find one yet. So we can't work with that company at the moment. So never say never, but we haven't found a lender yet that will lend on that lease. So be aware about all of the little things that affect this. Lease structure, ASTs versus licenses and exits. It's important to understand how I could have got about this for half an hour, but tenants are generally held two different ways. Standard AST, a short hold tenancy lease, exactly the same way any other tenants held in your property, and licenses. I'll give a very vanilla version of licenses. This is probably technically incorrect, but it's a simple way of describing it. When you rent a hotel room, a hotel effectively issues you a license for 24 hours to occupy that space. After that license runs out, you have no rights to that space, and the police can come and drag her out by your ear holes. Works exactly the same way. What it does is it gives the social housing providers a lot more control over the tenants and their ability to move them on. The license can be issued for certain lengths of time. It's issued to the provider, and the notice period can vary anywhere from 2 hours to 12 days or whatever. But it's important to understand that a normal eviction process doesn't have to happen when the tenants are held on licenses. Why that affects the exit? There was a provider we wanted to work with. The tenants were held on ASTs. They had a 3-month break clause in the contract on their side, which is perfectly normal. But if that tenant's on an AST and they have a break clause issue and they can't get that tenant out and they refuse to leave, it could take up to 18 months through the court system to get that tenant out. What if that provider decides to walk away? You don't know who that tenant is. You don't know their name, and the AST is not signed with you as the owner of the house. It's a big issue. So Kristy did some lovely negotiating, and she got it to the point where that lease now says that they cannot exercise that break clause unless the property is vacant. That's how we got around it. It's just about understanding where you're at and how that lease affects what you're doing. This is another big one, buying a property before provider approval. We get the contract assigned against a property at offer accepted. Can take up to 7 working days after that, but generally speaking, we assign the contract at the start before you're financially committed to anything. There's nothing worse than buying a property and then finding out the provider doesn't want it because the location doesn't work, or it's too close to the center of town, or it's above commercial, which I'll talk about that in a second actually, but you have to make sure the provider actually wants the thing and the rents work for you. So we do that up the front straight away. I know previously when we were talking in the lending section, somebody spoke about that a mixed-use commercial property. There is a tiny, tiny portion of quality social housing providers that will take anything above commercial. I know Zone Fee actually will sometimes. It's about the tenant profile. It truly doesn't work for like alcohol, drug abuse people, doesn't work for ex-offenders, doesn't work for a huge amount of tenant profiles. Because generally
about what the commercial unit is as well, though, isn't it?
Yeah, and its location as well, because quite a lot of commercial stuff can be in the centre of town. If somebody's got drug and alcohol abuse issues, you don't want them living above a pub. It's not a really good idea. You don't want them living above, especially fire hazards as well. You know, if there's the way that you may put a tenant down there that's like I don't know, it could be anything, could be, you know, something very simple and benign like a op shop, whatever, it doesn't matter. But a provider, if they're signing a 5 or a 10-year lease, they don't know who's going to live in that, be in that commercial space below them. A curry house could move in, or a chicken shop, whatever, and then there's a fire risk that they can't be above. It's too variable for them. So all of the good providers will almost never take something above commercial, very limited amount. And if Sue's still on here, she can actually talk to you about, because I know I've spoken to Sue beforehand about a site on a high street in Birmingham, I think. It was a flat and it was above an optician's right next to High Street. She's perfectly fine to take it. So there are absolutely exceptions, depends on the tenant profile, depends on the condition, but please understand the risks to that model. Okay. Lease term break clause and how lenders view the contract. We've been over a lot of that tonight with the lending room, and honestly speak to the brokers in the lending room about that one. It affects massively your lending. It affects your interest rate. It affects the ability to get lending. Talk to the broker before you commit to anything. Find out who the provider is. Find out what their lease is like. Go talk to your brokers before you spend any money buying a property. You have to make sure you can actually get lending on it and hold it long term. Okay. Kristy, next page, please.
So, so these are some little golden nuggets we thought we'd give you to kind of take away. Feel free to ask us any more questions in the breakout rooms, but these are probably the most pertinent ones for us. So I saw a really good post actually about this on Facebook the other day. Somebody posted a long kind of thread about the differences in the space. They covered a few of them, but I thought they actually covered it really well. So kind of that's what I'm saying. There is a massive difference between the social and supported housing space, and each area has different elements. So when people come to me and they're like, I really want to do social housing, I really want to do supported housing, I'm like, which part of it? Because there's just so many, and sometimes they don't know. So we kind of have to work through that to really understand. You could specialise in one area, but to be honest, you probably just want to specialise in one, because the need and the demand for kind of homes in that will probably be as much as all the rest of them. You know, the demand is massive in this space, and you just need to do different due diligence. So each time there's a change or a difference within that social and supported housing specialism, different due diligence has to be done. So you know, kind of need to understand that as well. So kind of try to learn how to do that if you can. The risk is also very different from an investment perspective. So, for example, if you work directly with the council, now the council may expect you to actually support those tenants, depending on what you're signing. They may expect you to cover the voids within there. They may expect you to cover the maintenance. And therefore, the risk in that compared to maybe working with a provider who does that for you is very different. And everybody has different risk appetites and different funding. So therefore, just how you can have a think about kind of how you work within that space as well. Now, I've worked in this space for 20 years, and I can tell you now, I learn something new every single day. So don't feel a bit overwhelmed. It's a massive space. There's lots to learn. There's lots to know. Yeah, and it literally changes continually, the rules, regs, regulations, kind of papers that they do in this space, and therefore providers across the piece have to adapt to them. So make sure, this is really important. This is one of the things we check when we're onboarding properties and stuff like that, that you have the correct permissions in order to be able to hand your house over. Okay, so we can help with this. So people don't necessarily think about this, especially if they're bringing a property with an existing mortgage, but it's actually having the right mortgage or lending in place. It might be, you know, we've had to refer our clients to lenders because they haven't got the right mortgage. It doesn't allow social or supported housing, and therefore they've had to remortgage, maybe face a few penalties, but that's the way they wanted to go. So you kind of have to think about that. The insurance that you've got to cover your house, the insurance company needs to be made aware that it's social and supported housing. You may have to switch lenders. And the other one is, and people forget this all the time, and we ask this as a question, is it a leasehold property? Because if it is, then you have to let the freeholder know. Is that right, Simon? I always get that one wrong. So it's really important to kind of think about a little bit outside the box, because for me, if you don't do that and something goes wrong and the provider isn't aware, you know, yes, you're affected and you may have to take your property back, but it's the people in that house that are going to be affected who may have got used to that property. And, you know, for me, that it's the service user that's really affected. So, you know, kind of think about these things when you're doing them. You need to make sure your rent's sustainable. So a lot of people try and negotiate up rents. If a provider tells you I can afford this, there's a reason why they can afford this. Okay, so don't try and push it up even by a pound, because if you do, it can actually have a massive impact on the service that they provide. So for example, if you pushed it up by a pound, they might not be able to kind of get the gardening done, or they might not be able to do the windows once a month. So you really have to understand, if you push that rent up, how's it going to affect them? And this is, as I harp on about all the time, it's about sustainability to the service user and to that provider. This one for me is a big one. And Simon, we get this all the time. The word exempt rents doesn't mean you will get a higher rate for your house. It's a terminology that's written in regulation. Okay, it's how things are costed up and how they're presented to the local authority. So rents are paid at that which the provider can achieve based on a very, very strict criteria they have to kind of follow to receive those rents. So if they say they can only pay a certain amount, there'll be a good reason. Yes, there are kind of scenarios where you can be paid higher rents, but you probably will have had to have adapted your property to a certain specification, and you're getting into kind of the real specialised space there. Okay, so that's kind of where that is. Yeah, we've said this before, not all leases cover voids and maintenance, so don't forget to read that small print. I read leases continually, I think, Simon, don't I?
You love it.
I love it. HMOs and Article 4, there are actually ways around this, getting around that in this strategy. So actually you can do that.
Literally fifth one today, didn't we?
Yes, we fixed one today. I was well chuffed. It's only taken me about 6 weeks to get it sorted, but it's done. It's sorted. And sometimes that's another thing. The time it takes to do things in this space isn't as quick as it can be in property sometimes. That was quite an exceptional one, but I wasn't giving up on it, and we sorted it.
Just let me touch on that. The client bought a house, didn't think it was in the Article 4 area in Nottingham. And when we checked the Article 4 area map, when you check the line, it was one street difference. So there was literally about 20 meters on a map difference between it being Article 4 and not. It property was going to go to Serco, couldn't go to Serco because they don't work in Article 4. We couldn't get change of use permission. So it took us a little while to find a good provider that would take it and didn't need a HMO license because use a different kind of planning, problem solver. But yeah, it was a bit of fun, that one, wasn't it?
It was, but I love finding a provider and getting the right solution. So that person's really happy now. You can start small. So some people don't realise this, but there's such a thing called kind of dispersed accommodation, where you can actually have one flat within a block of private rented sector tenants. So you've got one service user within there. And the reason providers do that is they want people to, get back into society. They might be a bit more heavily supported, but actually you may be able to hand just one flat within a block. So don't ever discount that, because that can be a possibility. You could go big and build a development. The list is pretty endless, to be quite honest. There's so many things you can do in this space. If you're passionate about this space and you have time to do the work, and I will tell you, it's a lot of work, as the ladies will be able to tell you, there's nothing stopping you opening up your own provision. But what I would say, and we were saying on that, during that presentation, make sure that you've kind of either got the qualifications you need, or that you've got yourself surrounded by the right team that has. That's all I'll say. And also, which we love, you can use rent to rent, and we actually have somebody on here who's done that as a strategy in this space, if you do it correctly and you've got all the compliance in place. So we've got a test case, we've got a case on here, haven't we, Simon?
Yeah, Michelle's on him.
Yeah, Michelle. So
yeah.
So yeah, it can be done as long as it's done correctly. So those are a few of the golden nuggets we wanted to share. That's all we're going to say for tonight. I'm not going to say, is there any questions, because you can ask us in the breakout rooms.
And you brilliantly yell at us if we take questions. So,
but we hope that was helpful.
That was absolutely awesome.
That was amazing. Absolutely amazing. I'm just going to stop.
Very helpful. Thank you.